I informed my wife, Emily, that my seminar had ended a day early, but due to flight constraints, I would still be returning on Tuesday evening. Despite her disappointment over my prolonged absence, she expressed her eagerness to see me. Reflecting on her words, I realized the extent of my frequent travels and resolved to prioritize my wife of 17 years more. At the airport, I decided to try my luck with standby flights and was pleasantly surprised to find an available seat on a flight to an airport near our home city, albeit a different one I had never used before. Taking the opportunity, I boarded the flight and anticipated surprising Emily by arriving home earlier than expected. However, upon reaching home just before midnight, I found the house dark and Emily's car absent. Perplexed, I called her on her cell phone. She answered groggily, mentioning she was in bed and assuring me everything was fine. Confused by her response and curious about her whereabouts, I questioned her further, but she insisted she was at home and suggested using her cell phone for communication due to issues with the home phone. Feeling a sense of deception, I decided not to disclose my early return and informed her of a delayed flight, promising to update her on my return plans later. Despite my suspicions, Emily expressed affection and eagerness to see me. After ending the call, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease, wondering about Emily's behavior and her whereabouts that night. I dialed our home phone and it rang without any issues. As tempted as I was to answer and engage in a solo conversation, I refrained and began searching our house, checking every possible hiding spot. To my dismay, it became evident that my wife Emily, was nowhere to be found. Although I'm in sales and not a rocket scientist, my intuition told me something was amiss. I felt foolish for not realizing it sooner. The following morning, I discreetly moved the rental car across the street and waited. At around 7 a.m., Emily's car pulled into the driveway with a man accompanying her. I concealed myself in a closet nearby, leaving the door slightly ajar. Upon entering, Emily informed her companion that she needed to change and prepare for work, promising to return in 10 minutes with clothes for the next day to avoid returning in the morning. Their conversation revealed that the man was Emily's new boss, someone she had previously described as obnoxious and arrogant. Their dialogue suggested a flirtatious dynamic, with Emily teasing her boss about his wife's perception of her as the perfect secretary and his plans to house hunt, which seemed to be affected by their rendezvous. As Emily rejoined her boss, they shared a suggestive exchange about spending the following night together, prompting concerns about my early return. Despite her reassurances about my temperament, I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger and frustration towards Emily's cavalier attitude and her boss's inappropriate behavior. "That sounds like a wimp to me," commented Jeff. "My wife would have my balls. And I'd have Ron's if he ever cheated on me." "Fear keeps you men in line," Emily quipped, adding, "most of the time. You don't seem to be too frightened of your wife." "Believe me, I'd be in deep shit," Jeff replied. "I'd be lucky to escape with my life, let alone my balls. Luckily she is in Houston, so I feel pretty safe." Their conversation sent my blood boiling. Not only had Emily been unfaithful, but she also held me in contempt. I sat down to contemplate the situation, and gradually, a plan began to form in my mind. I recalled Emily mentioning that her new boss was being transferred from the company headquarters in Houston. Determined to gather more information, I made a few phone calls. With some clever questioning directed at a receptionist at Emily's workplace, I managed to obtain all the details I needed. His name was Jeffrey Ross, and he had a wife and 2 teenage kids who were staying in Texas until the school year ended. He was currently house hunting every night after work. Utilizing an online directory, I found 3 Jeff Rosses in Houston. Fortunately, I struck gold with the first call. "Mrs. Ross? Mrs. Jeffrey Ross?" I inquired. "Yes, I am Mrs. Jeffrey Ross. Can I help you?" she responded. "Does your husband work for Halifax Company?" I asked. "Yes, he does," she confirmed. "This is Mr. Don Watson with the Halifax Company," I lied. "We are planning a surprise welcome party for your husband, Jeff, and you. We will provide round-trip tickets to Springfield and back. It's a total surprise for Jeff. Will you be able to attend?" Feeling a bit guilty for deceiving her, I continued, "I could get my sister to watch the children," she replied. "It sounds very nice." When is the affair? It's tomorrow evening. You'll need to catch flight 1435 on American. Just charge it to your card, and the company will compensate Jeff in his check, I instructed. We'll have someone at the airport to pick you up. The flight arrives at 5 p.m., and the party will be at 8, so there should be plenty of time. Remember to keep this a secret, okay? She assured me of her discretion, and I ended the call. Then, I began reaching out to some of Emily's friends and relatives, inviting them to a surprise party for Emily under the guise of celebrating a raise from her boss. Everyone seemed content with the explanation and agreed to keep it a secret from Emily. I instructed them to arrive at our home by 7 to ensure they'd be there when Emily returned. I didn't want to be a poor host, so I arranged for a local caterer to provide food and drinks for the following evening. I instructed them to set everything up on the deck by the pool, which Emily always dreamed of using for a nice party. This gesture would surely please her. I left clear directions, noting that the house might be empty when they arrived, but they could easily access the deck from the side of the house. The next day, I arrived at the airport half an hour early. As passengers entered the luggage area, I approached a couple of unaccompanied women, asking if they were Mrs. Ross. Just as I was addressing one lady, a voice called out to me. "Hello. I'm Mrs. Ross," she announced. "Are you here to pick me up?" I was nearly speechless when I laid eyes on her. She had the looks of a movie star. Though my wife was attractive, this woman seemed to epitomize elegance. "I'm Ron, here to pick you up. My wife works for your husband," I explained. "Has he ever mentioned Emily?" "Yes, he has, but I imagined her husband to be a bit older," she replied. Damn. That jerk had told his wife that Emily was older. I had to think quickly. She seemed somewhat suspicious. I often get that for marrying an older, larger woman. I joke that she just has more experience and there's more of her to love, I offered. She pondered over it for a moment, then smiled. I had dodged that bullet. We gathered her bags and headed to the parking lot. By the time we arrived at my place at 6:30, I was explaining to Mrs. Ross that it was an outdoor party for her husband as well as a birthday celebration for my wife, as guests began to arrive. The caterer had finished setting up everything, and I was impressed. It looked like a top-notch party. I had invited everyone to park behind a nearby church so that our driveway would remain empty. I informed the guests that I would hide in the living room, and when the guests of honor arrived, I would turn off the deck lights, signaling everyone to be quiet. We had sliding glass doors leading to the deck, with vertical blinds that could be easily opened by pulling a cord. We also had heavier drapes for colder weather, which were large enough for me to conceal myself and reach the cords and switches. A few minutes before 8, I spotted Emily's car pulling into the driveway. I turned off the deck lights and hid behind the drapes, and everything fell silent as Emily and Jeff entered, laughing. It was reassuring to know they were enjoying themselves. "I can't wait to sink my cock into that wet pussy of yours," Jeff laughed. "I thought we'd never get here. Give me that pussy, now." He pulled Emily's dress over her head, revealing a thong and nothing else. She giggled as she wiggled it off her round ass. "You're always so horny," Emily marveled. "This pussy is ready when you are, big boy." Jeff pushed her over the easy chair and unzipped his pants. With one hand, he held her down as he aimed his cock at Emily's slit. It was then that I carefully opened the blinds to the deck. The deck was dark, and the room was lit, so those inside couldn't see outside, and Emily and Jeff weren't paying attention. But those on the deck were getting an eyeful as Jeff pounded Emily hard and fast. He didn't last more than a minute or two before he began to climax. By then, I had moved to a chair to the side and was quietly observing. "I'm coming," groaned Jeff. He gave a few more thrusts before pulling out of my wife. Emily immediately turned and dropped to her knees, taking his cock into her mouth. As she cleaned his cock, she noticed me sitting there watching. She almost choked. Jeff held her hair and urged her to take his entire shaft into her mouth. "Yes. Suck me," he exclaimed. "I love how it feels in your throat." She eventually pushed him back, wiping her mouth. Cum rested on her chin and cheek as she stared at me. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. I was slightly disappointed by her mundane question. Perhaps the surprise had dulled her brain, or maybe it was the intense sex she'd just had. "This is my home, Emily." "My name is on the deed," I replied casually. "I didn't think you'd be home for a few days," she exclaimed. "That's quite obvious," I remarked nonchalantly. "I have to go," Jeff interjected. "I have things to do." "Can I get you a beer or anything?" I offered. Both Jeff and Emily were taken aback by my offer. I could see Jeff considering Emily's earlier remark about me offering him a beer. I smiled to myself as I watched his reaction. Before Jeff could respond, his wife stormed into the room from the deck, swinging a large purse. Jeff was so surprised to see her that he didn't move to protect himself. He landed about 5 feet from where he had been standing, courtesy of Emily's mother and sister, who had just entered the room. Emily remained naked with Jeff's cum on her face. "Put some clothes on, Emily, you tart," scolded her mother as she handed Emily her dress. "And wipe that cum off your face, sis," added Emily's sister Joan. "That was quite a performance you gave. You should consider a career in porn." Emily was too stunned to respond. I turned on the deck lights, revealing another 20 people looking in. I went outside to fill a plate with potato salad and wings, grabbed a beer from the cooler, and returned inside to eat. As I sat down to eat, I watched Jeff struggle to sit up and Emily attempt to regain her composure. It was quite a mess, but I realized I hadn't caused it. Emily and Jeff had put themselves, as well as their loved ones, in this difficult situation. In the long run, it was better for everyone to know the truth and move on. Eventually, things calmed down. Emily's cousin took Mrs. Ross to a motel, while another cousin helped Jeff to his car and gave him a ride. Emily declined her mother's offer to leave with her. "I know you must be upset," Emily's mom told me. "And Emily really deserves a beating, but I think she's already suffering." Then they left. Emily went into the bathroom, and I heard the shower running. I savored my beer and wings, reflecting on the evening's events. Sometimes, plans actually work out perfectly. After cleaning up the mess, I sat down with my last beer of the night. Emily entered the room and sat across from me. "I hope you're happy." "You did everything to ruin my life tonight," she complained. "Even my own family thinks I'm some worthless slut or whore." "Is that what you wanted?" "Emily, why would they think that? Have I done anything to give that impression?" "Have you?" I responded. "The only reason anyone would think that is because of what happened tonight. Would any rational person think that was the action of a whore or slut? If you thought we had a problem, you could have come to me instead of inviting the whole neighborhood," she hissed. "We have a problem?" I chuckled. "So you're saying if there was an issue, you wouldn't have discussed it with me before getting involved with someone else?" "I never intended to hurt you, Ron. I never imagined you would find out," Emily reasoned. "But you intentionally hurt me. So you think throwing a surprise party for my wife is worse than cheating on my marriage?" I questioned. "I doubt many people would agree with that." Then she said what I had been waiting to hear. "If you had been around more, none of this would have happened," Emily reasoned. "You weren't paying enough attention to me, so I fell for Jeff's advances. I was lonely and vulnerable." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. She was trying to shift the blame onto me, expecting me to apologize for her infidelity. Closing the bedroom door behind me and locking it, I felt a sense of relief. My chains were broken. I was emotionally liberated. And soon, I would be legally free. I eagerly anticipated my new life. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Write your opinion in the comments.